Hey everybody, we're here in World War II manufacturing exhibit with museum docent Bob R. And Bob, what are we looking at here?
Well, right here we have a Sperry A2 lower gun turret, which was used on the B-17 and the B-24 during the Second World War. This turret had a guy inside. He climbed in through this little entrance when the turret was rolled up inside of the airplane. He'd climb in and then they'd roll it down and he'd be locked in there. He had no parachute. He had two 50 caliber machine guns that he could fire in a complete arc, a circle around the aircraft on the bottom. And he was the ultimate protection of the bottom of the airplane. Looks like a really vulnerable spot to be, but as we were speaking before, the guy who sat in this turret statistically had the best chance of coming home from the war of anybody on board the ship. Fascinating thing, you had to be the shortest guy on the crew to get in there. I wouldn't do that job. The Sperry Company on Long Island made fine instruments, and one of their major products, aside from gyroscopes and other similar things, was the Norden bomb sight. The Norden bomb sight was a very highly developed way of dropping a bomb on a precise target. Every American bomber in the Second World War, 2 engines or 4, usually used the Norden bomb sight. It was top secret. It was very carefully built, and Sperry produced thousands of them. There are many pictures and movies made during the war, fictional or otherwise, where it shows the bombardier and a wounded bomber going down, putting 45 caliber bullets into his bomb sight to destroy the prisms so that the enemy couldn't copy it. Talk a little bit about Republic. One of the 2 major aircraft companies on Long Island, and one of the major producers of aircraft on Long Island during the Second World War. Its primary product during the war was the P-47 Thunderbolt, of which we have an example back here. This P-47 was the last Thunderbolt built, and it made about 12,000 of them, I believe. Republic was bought by Fairchild and then went out of business. But it had thousands of workers on the island working on these projects, and it survived into the 1970s with newer aircraft. But during the Second World War, this was what its major product was. This was a very effective, heavy-duty fighter bomber, the largest single-engine, single-occupant fighter that the U.S. used in the Second World War.
And possibly a predecessor for the A-10 Warthog, the tank buster?
It was indeed a predecessor in the long line of things, and also the F-105 Thunderbolt, Thunder Chief. Again, Thunder Chief, we have an example over on the other side in the jet age, or in the hangar. Thunder Chief was the largest single-engine, single-occupant jet ever built. The Ito Corporation, another company on Long Island, they built specialized floats for aircraft, taking these carrier-based aircraft and putting floats on them so that they could be launched from battleships and cruisers. The Grumman Corporation, the other major aircraft corporation on Long Island during the Second World War, it produced the F-4F Wildcat, the predecessor of the F-6F Hellcat, which was the primary and best fighter on the carriers in the Second World War. The TBF Avenger, of which we have an example as well, of both of these, which was the torpedo plane that we used in the Pacific primarily, but it was also used in the Atlantic and by the British.
Can we take a quick look at those planes?
Absolutely.
We can jump back over here.
Mm-hmm. Got enough light? Yeah, okay.
So here we go.
This is a TBM Avenger. Its actually designation was a TBF, which stands for Grumman, but Grumman outsourced most of its production at the request of the Navy to the General Motors Corporation, and thus the affixed M on its name. TBF means Torpedo Bomber Grumman. The Navy asked the Grumman Company to pass this on to General Motors so that they could produce more of the F6F Hellcats.
That case is memorabilia.
So what do we got here?
This is an F6F Hellcat.
All right, good. Come on over here because those guys are working. And they'll,
Right here.
yeah. All right. Tell us about the Hellcat.
The Hellcat was the predominant carrier-based fighter in the U.S. Navy during the Second World War. It accounted for, I believe it was a 19-to-1 kill ratio. It was specifically designed to combat the Japanese Zero, which was a much lighter aircraft with less armor and less sophistication in terms of self-sealing fuel tanks. And the Hellcat had all of that stuff plus more. It was a much bigger airplane than the Zero, and it was much deadlier.
And they all had folding wings, or were there fixed
The
wing
Hellcats
versions?
and the TBF all had folding wings. This lets them take up about 1/3 less space on the carrier, which means you can get more planes in the hangar deck for storage. So both of these had folding wings. The plane above it is an F4F Wildcat. The F4F was the predecessor of the F6F Hellcat. This F4F does not have folding wings, although many of them were built with that. The F4Fs were utilized on the Jeep carriers in the Atlantic and on the Jeep carriers in the Pacific as well to help support landings by the Marines.
There's a very unique story about it.
This particular aircraft was dredged up from the bottom of Lake Michigan. The Navy had 2 ships on Lake Michigan which were converted to basic aircraft carriers so that we could train pilots on takeoffs and landings. This particular aircraft, and that's the reason why it didn't have folding wings, was built for that purpose. And there were a number of accidents and planes went over the side. And this one was
Here at the
found.
museum by museum volunteers, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Our restoration department deserves a story of its own. They do wonderful work. In any case, this aircraft was brought up in awful condition. There's drawings or photographs of what it looked like. And it was restored by our group to the condition it's in today.
All right, come on over here.
Sure.
Tell me about this giant
Front end with Horace Little.
behemoth hanging from the
The
ceiling.
guy up there,
What is this thing?
that is an assault glider. Specifically, they were used primarily in the European theater to land airborne troops behind the enemy lines, the most notable being Normandy, when hundreds of these things were used by the British and the American Army to transport troops into the landing zones behind the enemy lines and let them start to fight from there. It was a pretty tough way to go to war. And I guess it was right up there with being a paratrooper. The dangers were similar. You had a group of people on there, a group of soldiers fully armed, and 2 soldiers who were trained as basic pilots. All they had to do was be able to fly the glider behind a tow plane. And I'm saying all they had to do, that's a massive job. But once the glider was on the ground, they also became infantrymen. And so if you had enough gliders, you had a whole regiment on the ground in a very small area in a very short time.
One shot at landing.
One shot only. And for the most part, one shot use. Because they weren't really built to survive and be used again.
Wow.
These things were built by furniture manufacturers throughout the United States. Again, they're all wood and canvas. They have basic controls, just basic controls. They don't need engine controls. All they have to do is be able to steer, use the elevators and the ailerons to find the right landing spot and put down.
And let's end over here on the taking a look at the P-47 from this side. You said this is the last one off the line? The last one ever built?
Yes, that's what we were told. It is the last one built, and I was told that it was built entirely by women. The workforce at Republic, like Grumman, was very highly a female force at the end of the war, because many of the men had been drafted out of the factories. or volunteered for service. This gives a depiction of what the Republic factory looked like, with the production starting with the basic components, building the fuselage, adding the wings, the engine, and so forth, and then rolling out to finished aircraft.
All right. And we have a little Grumman workshop over here featuring Rosie the Riveter, showing how women and minorities entered the workforce during the war.
As we said before, many men in the production workforce of all the aircraft companies were pulled into the war, either voluntarily or by drafting, and they were replaced by women. The women were trained. They ended up replacing the men on the line and doing a wonderful job of building stuff. At the end of the war, many of them were replaced by the men who went off to war and came back, and many of them felt very strongly that I want to keep working and doing stuff. So maybe this was part of the whole feminist movement, if you will, and a helpful one. But they did highly skilled jobs, the famous one being Rosie the Riveter Rod mentioned. But there were thousands of them. And many of our grandmothers and mothers were in the war effort building stuff.
All right, well, Bob, thank you very much for your time and this little tour.
My
And,
pleasure.
You're one of our many docents here that hangs out in the galleries
Yes,
and
to help visitors.
help visitors. So if you come on through for a visit, check them out. Meet Bob. They're all wearing these blue shirts.
See those badges, you can ask us questions,
Ask them questions.
and we'll try our best to answer them.
All right. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you later.
Thank you, Rod.